I feel so invisible most of the time, especially when I'm like,
Oh,
come,
Kristina,
come,
no. You're doing such amazing
come.
things and you're so loved. I know you
I,
are.
I have moments where I'm like, oh, you found me when you needed a mask, but suddenly I have a show and you've just disappeared, huh, folks?
I know. It's hard. People are burned out in so many different
I
ways
get it.
and
Yeah. And we're dealing with a lot of loss and a
yeah,
lot right now.
yeah. It's gonna be a while of PTSD, I think.
I already feel it. Yeah. It's weird walking around without a mask now. I feel like I'm like I have a secret gun, which is my face in the street. And then I'm like an unconcealed weapon
I know
that I feel like I have.
I saw a meme that was like, you couldn't just tell us that we can go around without our masks because I haven't gotten my face ready.
Yeah.
All
I
right, I'm
kind of
gonna
gotten
let
used to.
people in. Okay, hello, welcome everyone. Just so you know, we are transmitting live to YouTube. So if you don't want your face or name exposed, please make adjustments as needed with your Zoom settings. You can turn off your camera and you can change your name. So welcome everyone to our third installment of our Theater Arts Speakers Series. I'm Professor Nye. I'm a faculty member in the Theater Arts program at Pasadena City College, and I'm super thrilled that we're joined today by our really magnificent, wonderful guest speaker, Kristina Wong. Kristina, I'm just pulling up the questions that I have prepared for you.
Sure.
And at the end, in about like 45 minutes, just so everyone knows, we will open it up to questions that you all have. So Kristina, I'm going to start with a question. Oh, first, wait. Spiel. Kristina, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you're super busy right now getting ready for your performance with the New York Theater Workshop, Kristina Wong Sweatshop Overlord, and all of you have an opportunity to watch the show today at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Yes.
And I'm going to drop the link for the show right now in the chat. Do you want to tell us a little bit about
Yes. So I have been running two shows in rep out of my house. So you'll see here the set for Kristina Wong for Public Office is still here. I haven't been touring it as much, but I've been hosting different events on Zoom. And I have been talking a lot about what it's like to make theater from home. So even though I haven't perform that show from my house for a few months, I still have the set up, but I'm also performing on top of it Kristina Wong Sweatshop Overlord, which has been a running diary that I've been working on just on Zoom, and this is the last weekend to catch it. I'm not going to perform it again. It's basically me creating the DNA for the show I'll make after the pandemic. But it's me chronicling what it's been like to run a mask sewing mutual aid national collective during this pandemic, and everything from the top of this, where I very naively was like, we're going to do this, we're going to save healthcare workers, where do we find elastic and fabric, to we're not making masks for Walter Reed Hospital, the same Walter Reed that let Trump drive around in a presidential motorcade and that has salaried staff people. Like, they need us to sew them masks for free, to witnessing all these moments that it's like we've lived decades in this 15 months, from the Capitol riot, the election, the fires in California, like everything, all filtered through the lens of this. So I've been here in this home, and I'm also performing on top of it, which is very meta, because like I have elements of my, like, this is really where I store all the stuff for the Auntie Sewing Squad, like under the staircase. And it's also a set piece for some of the scenes in the show, right? So
It's very meta. So let's back up for a minute, because some of our viewers might be thinking, I thought I was coming to watch a performance artist. What is she doing making masks to rescue people in the middle of this pandemic? So Kristina, like I happened to witness the process, because I know you were like, hey, I'm making some masks for people.
Yeah.
And the next thing we all knew, you were like you were making a super cape for yourself and sort of saving, trying to help save the world. And I know that
never again. Next pandemic, you are all on your own. I'm going to watch Netflix, and the rest of you will be sewing.
Kristina Wong is not going to be out, everyone. So how did it happen? You started sewing, and then you called out to the community.
Well, at the top of the pandemic, I had a tour that was supposed to be in a theater of, this show that you see the set for. Kristina Wong for public office was supposed to tour all over the country right before the election. It's a live rally where I'm touching people, remember that? And like screaming with no mask on. And it was a great show. It was a great live premiere at the Skirball. And then I did only one more show at a community college in Sacramento at 12 in the afternoon. Right before the show ended, the students got a text saying we're going online tomorrow. And at that point, it was already like, are we still doing the show? Because the show the following day at UC Santa Cruz had already been canceled. And it was like that moment where you're like, is COVID everywhere? If I just go outside, is it they're going to touch that? And we weren't wearing masks quite yet because they didn't exist, and it was just not culturally something Americans were used to. And so I'm just grounded. I'm here at home. I was $7,000 of income already gone, and we were, as all artists were, made very clear of our life decisions and our career decisions. We were deemed non-essential, right? Just like, oh. But if my set pieces that just fell down, which are all sewn. So it's like I sew these and design these set pieces out of felt. And I had seen an article saying that hospitals were looking for home sewn masks because they just weren't prepared. We were not prepared. We were so unprepared that even Joann's and Michael's and Hobby Lobby weren't in stock with materials. Like it was literally like running around in the street, buying out. I bought out a tailor shop of elastic in the street, all cash. Like it felt like I was buying drugs, and I was just buying elastic, and then I mailed that elastic to other aunties around the country who were sewing. Like I spent more mailing it than probably what that elastic was worth at that time. Now the price of elastic has gone down. But yeah, I was just called to do it because I was like, okay, I could just sit here and feel sorry for myself. But you're watching the news and you're watching like this terrifying thing happening in New York where people are dying going to work, and they show up at work and they have to reuse the same mask over and over again. And it was like, I can't say no to anyone who was asking me to help them make a mask. Even though I had no idea, I'm not a very good sewer. To be honest, I've never run a garment line. I've never done relief work, but this whole year I should get an honorary graduate degree in like whatever the hell it is I just did this past year, because it was like we figured out as a group how to locate these very vulnerable communities, figure out who, because it's not like you just mail a bunch of masks to the Navajo Nation and they magically show up at everyone's house. You got to figure out who the organizers are. You have to figure out what are the systems in place to reach people in really rural areas. You have to figure out who's the most affected. So our focus switched within a matter of weeks from hospitals to these very vulnerable communities that don't have communications departments, that don't have big budgets, that were already bearing the brunt of systemic racism and poverty, and finding those people who would be able to distribute the masks to those communities. So 300,000 plus masks later, and 15 months of sewing later, here we still are, even after vaccines and stuff, because there are people who aren't taking the vaccines. There are communities that are still getting infected, and we're sending quite a lot of masks through the border because a lot of migrants are arriving to seek asylum, and they clearly are not like walking with big boxes of medical masks with them. So they're very vulnerable. So we are still sewing.
It's so incredible, Kristina. I mean, first of all, just like thank you on behalf of all of us for
Never again.
I know. Thank you for the work you've done and no expectations for the future. But I think you've actually demonstrated how essential artists are, because all of these skills are skills you have
Yes.
because you are a theater artist. And you know, your ability to organize, I know for a fact, because I know you, you know, you have written a million grants.
Yeah,
So
a
like,
lot of that has totally applied to that. And I will say, like, yes, while I have never worked for FEMA before, I feel like Auntie Sewing Squad is a clear example. That's the name of our group, ASK for short, which was not intentional. That was, oops. But it's a clear example of what happens if people who really care and performance artists like ran FEMA, because like all the skills like basically all the connections I had made, I used my audience base. That's who got shaken down both for the volunteer pool, for helping us locate communities, for just straight up giving us money. And so fundraising has actually been the thing that we've least been concerned about, and we're very lucky because I know some sewing groups ran out of money, and I actually just offloaded some of our donations to them so they could keep sewing at the beginning. But yeah, a lot of the resourcefulness and the scrappiness in which I work completely informed how we were able to be, you know, so kind of prolific as a volunteer sewing group.
yeah, I mean, there's really no reason why artists can't be utilized in emergencies. And I saw a lot of memes and things going around that were like, if stage managers were in charge,
yes,
of roll out, we would have no problem.
Oh my God. Like, yeah, it's a production. It's a production that was never ending. I think that was also what's weird, because when you make theater, you audition if there's an audition involved. You rehearse, you do the show, and you close. And I'd have rolls and rolls of fabric here, and I give away, and I'm like, yeah. And then I was like, oh no, we need more. And like it was constantly bringing things into the house and trying to get it out as quickly as it showed up. And it was exhausting, right? It was crazy because none of us had ever done this before. None of us ever sewed a mask, really. And suddenly we're like reading scientific papers trying to figure out like what is effective, because there's so much conflicting information going around.
Yeah, I was in my last year of college in New York when September 11th happened, and the thing that I'm sort of preparing myself for was a few months after, there was just this collective exhaustion. Like people, you know, I just remember being on the subway and seeing people just like look like zombies because you didn't, it was a similar thing where it's like the one event had happened, but we didn't know when it was going to end. And it's like, it's one thing when you're going through a challenging time, but like, you know where the finish line is. And
yeah,
we've
there's no
idea.
Yeah, and that's sort of what that we're working up to next, is a auntie retirement party, which is, and because we have so many artists in the group, it's like I'm making a show about it. And some of the aunties are academics, so they're writing about the aunties. We have a book coming out in the fall. Like it's weird. It's not like we were like at the very first day, like, let's create this empire that will historicize Asian American women in their role. And they're like, no, we were just like, oh. As this was happening, we were sort of witnessing the dynamics of like, we are mostly cisgender women in this group. We are a lot of Asian American women in this group. This is a time of heightened hate against Asian Americans, and just sort of the strange irony of using these skills that we got from our mothers and grandmothers who did this work as sort of the rite of passage into America. And now we're doing it for free because Gold Mountain failed to prepare us for this pandemic. But also realizing really quickly, oh, here we are, invisible labor, women doing this invisible labor again, and trying to change the narrative around that. And that's where a lot of my skills as a constant, relentless self-promoter come in, is if you go to our social media, we spend a lot of time putting a face to the aunties, so that because we've gotten so used to just, you press a couple buttons and something shows up from Amazon, right? But and when people would talk to it, the few times that people would talk to us that way and ask for things like, we have nothing else to do but make you custom masks for your wedding or your dental office. we'd have to push back because we were like, we need to protect our labor. Like, yes, this is about protecting people and being very selfless, but we also need to teach you how to respect our labor.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's something that I really love about you, Kristina, is that you are not shy. Like I remember a few Facebook posts where you were like, no, I am not here to make you, like, you want a specialized plaid rainbow mask.
Yeah.
Like, no,
go to Etsy.
no. Yeah,
We're trying to stop a genocide. We're trying to stop a genocide here, not be your like. We're not custom you for the pandemies, like.
Well, so we've launched into a huge hint for those of you who are just getting to know you now at your combination.
I'm bitter.
Yes, Kristina, everyone. Understandably so. Your combination, artist, activist, and now politician, both, metaphorically and literally. So can you just sort of share, at what point did you figure out that all of these things could combine? Did you have one love before the other? Like when you were little, did you think I want to be a human rights lawyer? And then you're like, but I also love performing? Or how did this happen? How did you happen, Kristina?
How did I happen? Well, I'll tell you, for some context, I'm third generation Chinese American. I grew up in San Francisco. My parents, so I was not the first in my family to go to college, and that's a privilege I have, that they sort of broke that ground and helped me understood that that was an option. Though I don't know if, I feel like the stereotype for a lot of Chinese Americans, like, you go to college, you have to go to college, specifically these colleges. And I think very much the way I was raised was that your job is your life's path is to go to Lowell High School, UC Berkeley, med school, marry a Chinese doctor, win the Miss Chinatown pageant, have Chinese doctor babies. And nothing was said of what happens when you don't do that. And I just remember I was so terrified of failing because it just seemed so unknown. And I get that that's why my parents wanted to protect me, because at that time in the 90s, you didn't really see what happened. Like, you didn't see a lot of people just become entrepreneurs. Like, the goal usually was to work for a company and get benefits and live that life. And now we are much more a gig economy, for better or for worse. And there are a lot more kind of entrepreneurs, for better, for worse. But I just read a statistic that millennials only have like 4% of the wealth, as opposed to like when boomers having like 21% of it when they were their age, right? But so that's why I say for better, for worse. So better because, okay, now we have more options to explore different things, but worse, but because the ability to actually survive financially is a lot trickier. So but I just was very much like, I felt like I was in a very specific grid in the way I was raised. And the release I had, I tell people my first performances were crank calling people. I really enjoyed crank calling people. And there was a little phone number called the Night Exchange, which I found out still exists, this is like totally terrible, right? We were like 13-year-old kids calling what was essentially a phone sex chat line, because you must be 18 or older to be here. And we're like, okay, like, and we're just on a landline and catfishing people. And I just got to play different characters. Hi, I'm Cindy. I'm a cheerleader with the San Francisco 49ers. I got big boobs. Like, and it was sort of what I didn't realize why I enjoyed it so much. One, it was like a terrible sex education, but two, I felt very powerful in that I could, like, wow, I get like all these adult men are like, so desperate to talk to me. But I also got to play characters that were divorced from the body I was born into, which felt really freeing, right? And so those, I would say, were my first performances. And that sort of aesthetic of pranking still sort of exists a lot in my work. And I did plays in high school. I didn't know that performance art and what I do existed. It was just like, you audition for a play that someone wrote, usually a dead white guy, like Neil Simon. Neil Simon only recently passed away. And thank you for writing that play. anyway, but but like that was all the plays we were performing, and I sort of internalized I'm only able to be cast in this because this is school and they have to kind of openly cast, and sometimes it didn't really feel always like the casting was that open, but they just sort of threw me a role. And then I was like, I love this. I love getting to be something else and breaking this idea of what I'm supposed to be. So it was just like very therapeutic. It gave me a social circle. It gave me sort of an identity as a theater kid in high school. And then when I got to college, I was just like, feminism, racial activism, like racial justice, social justice, what? Like I just, it all hit me at once how much I had internalized and accepted and just sort of quietly had been raised to believe like to not fight it, to just like work twice as hard to get half as far. And just watched all this solo work made by artists of color who were like, they didn't need to audition because they wrote the show. They didn't need a theater because they were performing in a bathroom. They didn't need, and it was so freeing to look at that and to look at like, wow, they're not even using words. Some of the performers, they're just gesturing and there's a projection on them and they write words on their bodies. And I was like, I loved it. And it brought me into their pathos and it felt like they were releasing it. And I was like, cool. It's like therapy that you do in front of people. Like this is very naive. And I would tell younger artists to not ever go into performance as a replacement for actual therapy. But at the time, having gone to the school therapist and being very ashamed of going, I got more out of being in a performance art class and more out of doing a show or writing a play that was a very veiled, where the main character was clearly me, but clearly like working out stuff in front of people. So yeah. So I just had this moment where it's like, I don't think I want to spend the rest of my life working for IBM or for Deloitte and Touche. And a lot of people were like, what are you gonna do with your English degree? Teach? Because that's all you can do is teach. And it's like, and I think that's also really, limiting, right? When people thrust that on you. And I would tell people to shut up. Like, like we get to have a million careers in our lifetime. And I think that's what's different about these generations going forward and what I've seen about the people I've gone to school with. Some of them majored in this and then later they became therapists or doctors or like, and that makes you much more of an interesting and rich person if you're not just like hyper focused on engineer, right? That I think that's also what's limiting about the whole system of grading and
Absolutely.
concentration and this kind of stuff is it breeds this thinking that if you spend half a second focused on something else, you'll like destroy someone on the operating table, right? Like that, and that's not we just have to kind of reframe I mean, yes, you cannot get spread thin, but like you can be full people and you don't have to avoid things. And I might be just speaking to my upbringing and this may not make any sense to anyone who's listening, but I think my mother very much was like, well, if you're not going to become a ballerina, don't take ballet. If you're not going to, you got a B+ in English, maybe you should quit your theater work. And I'm like, what? Like, so it's, so very much like that you have to be hyper focused on only the things that seem to count, matter instead of just kind of being rich, interesting people. And my mother, of course, has now changed her mind this many years in, but I basically I left school going, I'm going to become a performance artist. And that's a crazy thing to do because, what I've described it as is when you go get a job working for someone else, you go into their garden that's already growing and you pick their fruit and vegetables and you get to keep some at the end of the day. But when you're an artist, you go into some dry plot of land. You may not even have that plot of land. It may be this big,
Right.
and you take seeds and you plant them and you water them and you water them and you take care of it and you wait for harvest. You wait for it to grow. And I've had points in my career where it feels like everything's growing and harvesting. And I've had points in my career where it's felt like all my crops died. What do I do? Right now, I would say this is a very strange time because it's a time of so much loss, but I've never gotten so much kind of attention all at once for the different things I've been doing in my career. And It's hard because like, unlike people who, work 40-hour days and they go home and they can rest, it's like I'm working like 100-hour days, it feels like, and just constantly moving nonstop. But it's that sort of, that's what is different about thinking about making a career as an artist, or any kind of creative, or any, I think even an entrepreneur would tell you that, which is also very creative, is that um, you are your own boss, which means you have to keep yourself going, which means you're doing multiple jobs,
Right.
which means you're doing all the facets of the business.
Yeah, I mean, including, and we talked about grant writing before, but I think sometimes people think, oh, I don't, and to your point about taking a diverse group of classes, I mean, it's a really good idea to take a business class or a writing class as a
Yes.
person so that you do know how to write good grants, or hire someone else to do it is also an option, but that
Yeah.
can be expensive. But yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't think you were speaking only for yourself, because from my end of being a professor, like so many of my students are in that place where they're majoring in something because it's what they were told to major in, or they're having doubts about their own path and they feel all this pressure, especially when tuition is like $50,000 a year plus.
Mhm.
How do you say like, I'm just going to take a year to like explore, right?
I wanted that gap year. I feel like every student should take a gap year. We don't have that built into our culture, and I quite honestly, most people would end up spending in America because of what it costs to survive, would probably spend that gap year not like traveling the world, but probably just taking a job at Sprouts or something like that. But I think it's good to have a break and to
Yeah.
look around and see what's out there. But I think just the way, like, I remember my first internship, I was like such a robot, like, just do I wasn't sure how to express agency, and so much of me wanting to be an artist, or
Mhm.
whatever this fictive idea of an artist was, it felt like the only job that existed where I could call the shots a little bit more, and I just felt so awkward in office settings. But now I feel like if I did work in an office, I could apply a lot of the skills I've you know culled over the years as an artist, so that it wouldn't feel so like jammed up. This doesn't mean I'd be like doing interpretive dance at a meeting or something, but just sort of relax into the idea that there are ways to be myself, still
Yeah.
get work done, bring my humor to the situation. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we have a super long way to go culturally in the US of valuing artists in all areas and disciplines. But just so students who are watching, there are programs like I went with a Theater of the Oppressed group to perform for first year med students at Keck Medicine School.
Oh,
That's like
interesting.
compassion and ethics for their patients. I know that there are a number of hospitals that are starting to now work with performers for that sort of thing. Corporations, I mean, I'm sure that a lot of .coms want creatives working for them
Yeah.
for kinds of reasons. So, just to say, like, be open and think broadly about how your skills as a performer and an artist can be used. Not to say that it's like easy or valued, or that like anyone can go get a job that's gonna pay the bills. For sure not. But I think there's an increasing range of possibilities. I do want to bring in your political life, Kristina,
Yes.
because this is one
Oh,
of,
yeah, we didn't even get to that. Okay.
yes, because I just think this is such an incredible story, and of art imitating life, imitating art. Uh,
Yeah.
so tell us.
Well, fast forward 20 years into 18 years into my career, I had an offer of a television pilot with True TV. Lionsgate was the producer, and it was a reality TV pilot that we pitched when Obama was still in office. And the idea was that I was Kristina Wong, this sort of this well-to-do activist, but with some out of the box strategies to get people involved in social justice. So our pilot was, we're looking at the Porter Ranch gas leak in that facility where a lot of people got sick because there was this gas leak, and the gas facility was about to reopen. And people who lived there didn't want it to reopen, but not enough people were showing up at their protests. So this is what was actually happening. And so in our pilot, I invited 2 Instagram models which is like a crazy thing that exists, right? Like there's this whole new terrain. Like 20 years ago, they like that body type and that height type wouldn't have been considered model worthy, but now, I'm not saying go pursue that, but like anyways, but these 2 particular models had a huge following because they had big butt implants, and all the quotes or like all the comments are just like the splash emoji and the peach emoji and stuff. Anyway, the whole idea is I bring them over to this house and I go, okay, Porter Ranch's gas facility is going to reopen. No one's coming to their rally. We need to do a meet and greet at City Hall. So we'll just tell all your following that we're doing a model meet and greet. But when they get to the City Hall, we're going to put protest signs in their hands while they wait to meet with you. So the idea is like we had all these perverts like on Instagram, like hanging out to meet these models. And it was a really tricky pilot to pull off because there are many moments where I was like, is this anti-feminist? What am I doing? Right. But and it especially felt weird because we shot once Trump took office, and it just felt like making fun of myself as a naive, like, okay, activist, like just made me a liability to all the things I cared about. At the time when Obama was in office, I felt like we had a little bit of wiggle room to kind of make fun of that persona. And then when Trump took office, like activism was very much life or death. And it was very hard to satire. I think we just kind of lost over the last 4 years. So here I was, a reality TV star with no TV show. Where have we heard this before? And I was like, what do I do with myself? I guess we'll run for public office, because politicians and artists have switched jobs. They are now the clown show. They're the ones making shock and spectacle. And we as artists are the last like hope for holding some space of sincerity, earnestness, and social change. And that became the aha moment. I'm going to run for office. I'm going to do a show about it. And that's going to be my project. So I ran for a couple small offices. I won the second one, which is a local office in Koreatown. I'm the sub-district 5 rep, which is the southernmost district of Koreatown, which means I represent my half square mile. It's unpaid. I commit to about a couple meetings a month, long meetings. I'm not like all wacky, out of control in the meetings. I'm just kind of myself, because I don't need to be the craziest person in the room. We got that covered, folks. We got it would surprise you. Like when I look at the folks in the neighborhood council meeting, I'm like, how are you not a performance artist? This is not some weird conceptual thing you're doing. You just act this way. Okay. But yeah, it's weird how similar. It's just slower. It's like much slower theater, right? Like, but basically when politicians campaign, it's theater, right? It's spectacle, it's theatric, it's call and response, it's bringing in symbolic stories from Joe the plumber or so and so to endorse and talk about whatever. And so these are the things that I was really interested in exploring in Kristina Wong for Public Office, which is the show that I premiered live and then ended up having to pivot to perform in my house on Zoom.
Did you think you were going to win an office seat, or was that
at one point I was like, should I run for mayor? Should I run for sheriff? But and I talk about that in the show. It's very, like, even to do a joke run, it's really expensive. You have to pay a filing fee. And that can be in the thousands of dollars, which some like Caitlyn Jenner or whatever, they can just throw that money. That's like nothing to them. But for me, I was like, and then to actually run a viable campaign where you get votes, you have to, I got to know a lot of people running for office, and they had to take a lot of time off their jobs to raise money. And this kind of shows you how certain people are able to run for office because they have access to that money. And a lot of working class people do not. Yeah. And you kind of have to become you have to kind of, like, when I look at Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who was relatively unknown, she just found that little spot in the primaries running against someone looking at a primary that not a lot of people vote in, and she counted the numbers of palms she had to shake, and she really, and now she's like kind of lionized herself into this sort of persona, right? That and that's sort of like that lightning in a bottle thing that a lot of candidates are trying to capture. Like, how do you find that one, how do you work this bureaucratic system where you find this moment where not a lot of people are running? And so for me, it was this neighborhood council election. I did have to beat out at least one person for my seat. But for me, it was like, I just got out, I pushed this backdrop into the street the day of the election. I wore my white suit. I tried to pass as Korean as possible and use my restaurant Korean as much as possible. And I wrangled in enough votes to win that particular election. And I ran unopposed, and now I'm reelected with 19 votes total. So you want to talk about
I mean,
how strange these systems are.
Like governor next, Kristina. Are you learning anything? For me, politics and government have been a passion of mine for me as long as theater was, essentially. And I think it's very important to be involved politically. Yeah. Like, have you learned, because I think sometimes people either, it all feels like a giant mystery, or people, like when people say we have to be our own governance, I'm like, that's great, but laws impact people's lives. So we actually do have to get involved.
Yeah, you do. And while I say some of it feels very performative, because we are mostly an advisory council. So, the story I tell at the end of Kristina Wong for public office is how we voted to abolish ICE, but that if neighborhood council cannot take down a federal agency, unfortunately. So it's a symbolic vote. So a lot of what politicians do is create a series of symbolic gestures that lead up to the big gestures, the big powered people who actually pull the lever. I will say that it does make a difference when someone shows up and speaks out, and culture shifts before policy will change. So what do I mean by this? I mean, when you look at how the Supreme Court finally voted to make gay marriage legal, it took decades of normalizing gay people, gay relationships, gay marriage, seeing drag queens on TV, for people to be like, why is for seeing ridiculous straight people get divorced over and over again, like for people to go, why is this an issue that straight people who might not even know each other can get married, but gay people who have been in love forever cannot, and like, what does it even matter? Is it even about love half the time? It's just it's how you file taxes. And but it took all that to get to shift for the Supreme Court to finally vote for it to happen. So we have to, as art makers and image makers, we have to think about where we have the power to shift narratives. But it doesn't just happen on stages. I think it's so important when people take the time to come to our meetings and speak out on stuff. Like when we had our vote to abolish ICE, I was not clear that it was going to go in the favor I needed it to go to, because we had just voted down some funding for unhoused communities the month before. And I was just like, who are these people, right? Like, but apparently K-Town, we love undocumented immigrants, but we can't stand unhoused people, apparently, like according to these two votes. Right. So I brought in a lot of friends who were undocumented to speak about their experience. And it was one of the most emotional for me. I was like sobbing the whole time. It was really emotional. And it was so, how could you not vote to support these people who are right here in this room and telling you how terrified they are of losing their family members, or what, just basically what could happen in their lives if they're deported. So I think it's really important to understand what stories you represent and how can you present them in front of the people. Like when legislation affects you, that's your monologue. You're going in front of people. And that's what I loved about a lot of political rallies, even ones I didn't agree with, was just like how constructed they were. And like, it is not some weird accident when someone is invited to tell their story up there. Like they are looking at those metrics, those details. It is theater. So yeah.
100%.
Anyway,
I mean, it's like when I see all the stunts Marjorie Taylor Greene's pulling.
Oh God.
if she didn't have an audience, she wouldn't care about any of this. Like, it's
she's like a real housewife. Like, these are real housewife theatrics. Like, okay, who am I gonna like? I'm gonna go up against AOC because she represents this thing, and I'm just gonna. I don't even think she probably knows how to propose bills in Congress and do like basic nuts and bolts things, because she's just
it's almost
screaming and screaming.
Performance. Yeah,
it's all show.
Yeah, it is. Well, speaking of representation, I mean, this has not, as you brought up earlier, it's been a very challenging year for the AAPI community, and a huge uptick of hate crimes, and which, like, there's so many challenging things happening right now that I feel like that has, like, the attention on that is already dissipating because the next crisis is happening, but it's still an issue. So where do you see theater and film and television in relationship to people's understanding of this community? It seems like, from my perspective, like, when I try to think of plays that celebrate Asian American culture, I have less of a database than I do for others, which is like work I need to do, but also I think because there's less of it produced. So what are some, like, do you have any examples that you think are doing the work, and or where do you think it needs to go?
For many years, I was very cynical, and especially in college, when people would be so critical of any Asian Americans on TV, and they're like, why'd Lucy Liu take that dragon lady-esque role? And it's like, the thing is, the power structures in place are still white dominated. And okay, she could have turned down the role, but it wouldn't, someone else would have just taken the role, right? And then we would be mad at some other actress, right? And I also, for a long time, was like, we can't look at television and film to save us, because so much of the way that's funded and their priorities and selling commercials alongside it need to, like, flatten and soften certain things so that an audience can watch it and then watch the commercials that go with it. But that's where I've always, but I feel that's shifting, and we are getting a lot edgier and nuanced representations. But I feel like where it's going to be the most nuanced is theater and performance, where there are no commercials that need to be pleased. And I feel like a lot of the stuff in theater is way ahead of the curve of anything we're going to see on TV. A lot of times, especially if it's made personally by the artist, right? And maybe I'm talking about myself, but I loved watching the solo work in the late 90s and in the early aughts, because I felt like that's where I met communities. That's where I met the transgender community, which I really got to understand sort of the nuances around the Black experience that just weren't things I was seeing on TV. And I made friends with those artists, right? And they became part of my community and stuff. And I felt like that's where it's at. And I can't wait till we can be more in person and not just engaging this way, to really understand that that's where I was truly understanding the intersections of our experience was in theater. And I feel like there's film and TV, some independent films, maybe we'll get there, but there's just something about being in a space with someone's live body and, like, agreeing to be quiet and listen, which is huge. It's huge in terms of how we also practice empathy and understanding.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think we're getting much closer to being back in the live theater. And I can't wait to see you perform and to go see shows with you. So my last question before I open it up is, because we are speaking to a group of college students, if you could go back and say anything to college age Kristina, what do you wish you knew? And that could be about
so many things. Okay, well, I've covered some. One is that doing live performance is not a replacement for going to actual therapy. That while it like, I toured a show called Wong Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which is about depression and suicide. That helped me release a lot of my angst and a lot of things I had been holding on to my entire life. But touring it on and off for 8 years was not healthy. So I think that there's something you have to be careful is when you perform yourself. It's like I think naively, and people have reflected this back at me. They're like, "Oh, you get to just be yourself for a living." I'm like, no, not really. Like, it is really exhausting. So you have to find ways to kind of have boundaries and take care of yourself and know, okay, it's time to retire this piece. So for me, Sweatshop Overlord, it's a relatively short life, and maybe it could have continue to have a life. Colleges definitely are looking for things that they can book virtually, but I feel like I've grown out of the work. And so this is where me as my own boss needs to kick myself in the butt and say, this is just you writing the DNA for what's next. And I had thought that when I made a hit show, someone would just show up and go, Kristina, here's the rest of your life. You have a TV show now. And that never happens. No one's coming to save you. That's another thing I learned. For many years, I watched as all my friends my age got married to rich partners, and I was like, oh, when do I get that? And then I've also seen them get divorced from those partners, or be completely dissatisfied, or not be pushed to be a better artist because they had all the means, right? Or they just move on to some other kind of interest. And I, for a long time, just sought out like, I'm just going to marry rich, or uh someone will get me out of this. And that's not the case. At the end of the day, even if you have tons of loving people in your life, you still have, maybe with their support, you still push you to what's next. I was reluctant for many years to move to New York. I was hoping that someone would hand me a job and give me the reason to go. And I can tell you, someone who didn't move to New York, that I had to, it was because I didn't push myself to go do that, and I should have. But the great thing is I'll be in New York for 2 months in this fall doing a brand new show at New York Theater Workshop. So that sort of has happened, and I think a lot of it's because I've sort of shifted my thinking around how I make stuff. I make stuff not going, okay, I'm going to cash out and make all this money doing stuff. I'm making it to make it with a faith that the community I've built and the network I've built will be interested or not, but I'm not going to get super angry if this is not their cup of tea, but I'll just keep making. So yeah, a lot of it is that I think there's a sort of impression you get a college education and then you're complete, and then you just go into the world and you just use your college education. You're constantly learning and you're constantly growing, and the degree is just one big thing you accomplished. But there's so much to learn, and you got to get out of that thinking, and that's a lot of it's my mother's fault. Her fault, but like this thinking that this thing makes you, right? And you're always being made, you're always growing. So yeah, it's a marathon. It is not like you just get the college degree and boom, everything shows up.
No, and by the way, if y'all really want to get in on a good time, follow Kristina on Facebook for the most amazing text interactions between Kristina and her mother.
Yes.
It is its own show, and I personally hope a coffee book one day. And I have to get it in. Kristina did marry recently a very handsome guy.
Ginger. He's a ginger, everybody.
I don't know if he's rich or not, but Kristina
he's not.
Did marry Happy
the cat.
Hi, Happy. And we're all really thrilled for you, Kristina. waiting for this day to come. It's true love.
Yeah, it's true love.
True love, interspecies love. I'm dropping Kristina's website for all of you also to check out, more of her shows. So I do want to open it up now to those of you who are here with us for any questions you have for Kristina. Good questions only. I'm kidding. Don't.
Dr. Christy, thank you for your reactions. Keep your video on and being so reactive.
Yeah, I make sure to leave the camera on. I feel bad for you guys talking to nobody sometimes. So, but yes. So my question is, you keep talking about, right, this don't use your work as therapy, which I totally get.
It's therapeutic.
But as a performance artist, right, can you articulate when as a writer, when you shifted from like, okay, I'm writing about me, right? I'm writing for me even, to like now I'm writing you're writing globally, you're talking about community, you're talking about right, a much so like, can you articulate what shifted in you in the artistic writing side? I've done solo shows, so I totally get how you can get so self-involved. But how do you take it to the
it was totally touring Wong Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest over and over again, and getting to the point that I talk about a very traumatic thing that had happened to me. And when I first performed the show, I couldn't stop crying, and it was real. And then I got to the end, like by a point in the run where I couldn't cry anymore. And I was like, oh, great, I've exploited this moment in my life where it's gone from being a personal thing that I just needed to feel like I wasn't ashamed of anymore to something that now I just tell for money. Right. Like, and I got very disenchanted in those years, and I began to feel like an ambulance chaser because I was being booked at campuses because I was working so hard to get booked. And I felt like I almost like hinted that maybe the show would help save everyone's life. Like I just made these like almost unrealistic promises, and I just felt like I'd lost who I was, but I also had grown. But performing the same version of myself over and over again wasn't healthy. And now I feel like most shows I make, they should have a span of like a year or two, and then I just move on. And I learned from there. It's like I made 2 more shows that were about things that had happened to me, and not all of them were like super traumatic, but it just wasn't as interesting because theater is such a long process to make. That like you spend the time making the show, you're still sitting and holding this bag of memories. And so it's not that I can't be informed by that or touch on that in my work, but I told myself going forward, every new show, I need to be trying something I have just no idea. So I bring myself to it. Maybe I touch on the past, but I'm not like, like it's filleting and going through every detail that maybe. Yeah. So for example, I ran for office, right? The show before that, the Wong Street Journal, I went to Uganda. I had the cliche eat, pray, love experience where I, and I admit it in the show, but like where I just had to explore other things. And it touched on a lot of things from my past, like going there. But it wasn't a show primarily about like, my pain in my past, if that makes sense. And it was just healthier for me to grow that way. And this one is a little weird because it's like I'm in the pandemic talking about everything that's happening in it. And but I think whatever I continue to make of it would not be me reenacting the pandemic for an audience. Like I think it's interesting now-ish while we're still sort of at the end of the pandemic to watch a pandemic happen inside. But as we go, if I go to a live stage, I don't know that I necessarily would be fun for me to to do that. So
awesome. Thank you.
I don't know if that's a clear answer, but yeah.
Yeah. It's your answer.
The point where it hurts and you're just like, it's not working. I also realized, like, I think when you're younger, you're like, all the people who hurt me are going to be at that show. They're not. 10, 15 years in, they've moved on. And
you didn't send them a copy
and
signed autograph copy.
And you can't avenge them with your work. So you got to do something for you in all this.
Right.
Yeah. So Jell writes, not really a political question. There's no such thing as a bad question. I was kidding. But what is your favorite performance that you've done? And I would add to that, Kristina, you did go to Uganda. Like, what has been the most surprising place you've landed in your career? Because you have really kind of been all over the place, literally and
favorite. I can tell you the worst performance, but the kind of a fun tour was performing the Wong Street Journal in Nigeria, which is a different African country than the one that I had done work in and made a show about. That audience just watches theater very differently than they watch it as like for their music concert, and when they see people they know, I'm like talking and they're like walking over to their friends and taking selfies, and I'm not trying to, I think it's just culturally how they watch stuff. I don't want to dismiss them as terrible people, but the week that I spent there, was so great. Like it was like so cool to just hang out in Nigeria and meet all these art makers and stuff like that. So that was like the worst show in sort of a best circumstance I've had. Um, I have had people from my past show up at shows, and um, I'm not doing, like I said, I'm not doing shows necessarily at this point for like, I'll show you, but it has been nice to have a few of those moments where it's like, see, I've grown. You're watching me grow. Yay. I can't, God, I remember there are a few shows that like, it's usually a premiere that's gone really well, or the first time around the show goes well when I can't sleep at night and I'm like, wow, I did that. Oh my God, I'm Kristina Wong. So Skirball, the first live premiere of Kristina Wong for public office, I thought was fantastic. I felt like I was inside my own comedy special. There was like stuff that wasn't actually necessarily funny when I wrote it. People were laughing and they were on their feet by the end, um, even before I, could cue them to stand on their feet. So it felt like a real rally. I think that would be my one of my favorite shows.
Vanessa asks especially in the face of all the horrific crimes that have been happening, how do you find the resilience to keeping on?
It's hard. I have noticed my own behavior has shifted. Like I live in Koreatown where I was not afraid to walk around at night, and now I have like a spike thing attached to my keychain and a little hand alarm. And I have noticed like, I gotta go walk outside right now, so it does affect me on that kind of personal safety level. How do I keeping on? I think knowing that there is a network of people talking about it in a healthy way. Like I do have people in my life, like my family's just terrified and they spread the terror with each other and they don't know how to communicate in a way that is about being strong and resilient and dismantle white supremacy. Instead, it's like, make sure you bring your stick with you. Bring your stick. Oh, look at this video of an elder being beat up. And I think they just don't know how. And I think it's important to keep people in your life who are like trying to talk about it in the bigger picture healthy way. I think also recognizing that I have some power as a neighborhood council official. So while like I can't like stop things literally in the street, I am witnessing community organizations struggle with how to address it and coming to us for funding. And so one clear example was Korean American Federation of LA came for funding for a brochure in Korean that would explain this is a hate crime, this is how to yell for help, and make sure you call the police. And then we were like, ugh, like it's not a bad idea, right? Necessarily, but it sort of like still puts the onus of you're going to be hate crime, you're going to be hate crime. Uh-oh. And so we had to try to suggest ways, are there more proactive ways that we can go about it that aren't just like telling people to call the police after the fact? And a lot of people have a lot of trust issues rightfully with the police and stuff. And so trying to think around like community solutions that maybe I have a little bit of power to put out.
Mm-hmm. Kristina, I know that you have a tight schedule because you've got a show today. I do want to shoot Florence's question to you in a second.
Yeah, we could take this one. Yeah.
Before I say goodbye to everyone, I just want to remind you we have one more event next week. We're talking to Larry Bogad, who also does incredible combination of activism and performance. So I hope you'll join us next Friday at noon. And I'm also going to drop in right now. Kristina and I had another conversation for my podcast, self-promotion, My Year Without a Man, talking more specifically about what it's like to be a woman in the fields of theater and performance. So you can check out our conversation there. So last question, for Asian parents, and I would say many, like just generally parents, there's a lot of pressure and anxiety towards children. Do you have any experience or suggestions of how to maintain healthy relationship with your parents? Very small question, Kristina. You might say that that's a constantly evolving.
It's evolving. I will say that my parents have gotten to know who I am better through my shows, and that we have more honest conversations with them in the audience listening versus us on the phone. Like on the phone, it feels like a parole officer. Yeah, I'm fine. House is fine. Yeah, like it's just. But I will say I have started just saying, when you say that, it makes me feel this way. I just need to let you know that, and it's upsetting me. And because what it used to be was I would just scream back or yell back or just reflect it and never just succinctly express that a way they were communicating to me was causing me anxiety. And I did notice a shift. And then I also apologize sometimes to and say I'm sorry that we had the disagreement. And because I remember my parents didn't want me to visit them last year March because they were afraid I'd bring them the virus from my tours. And my father started screaming, like, and I was like, you're overreacting. This isn't a big deal. This coronavirus thing isn't a big deal. And he got really mad and he yelled, and I texted, I'm sorry we had that disagreement, and I look forward to when we can see each other. And like, and just, it's like just being kind of reasonable and not coming back at it with aggression or passive aggressive behavior, which is really hard. And it was a really kind of bad habit that I acquired from my upbringing, is being passive aggressive. So I don't know if that helps, but.
No, I think that's really lovely advice. And, we can't totally understand our parents and all the things that they've gone through, just as they can't totally understand us. But I love that your shows and them getting to watch the shows have led to that experience. I'm going to put in, again, one more time, New York Theater Workshop, Sweatshop Overlord. This is a really, really great show. And now that you've gotten to experience Kristina in this conversation, I don't know if there's any kind of student discount tickets or anything with New York Theater.
Yeah. If you put Overlord as the code, it'll be $5 that ticket.
Okay, $5 a ticket. That's less than a Starbucks. You're gonna laugh and maybe even cry and get to see Kristina in action. And thank you again so much, Kristina, for joining us.
And my mother will be in the audience, or some of my relatives. I'm not sure which one she's coming to, but she comes to a lot of them. So
might even be happy. And I'll say that, like, Kristina's performances, they're often interactive. Like, it's not just going to be sitting in front of a computer screen. You're going to have a really, really great time. So I highly encourage you all. And, you can only talk about theater and learn about it intellectually so much, but like the best education is watching it. Making it. And Kristina is a maestra. So watch Kristina and you're going to learn a lot. Thanks so much, Kristina. And thank you all for joining us today. We super appreciate it, and take care, everyone.
Thank you. You're a great moderator. So much good energy. Thank you. Bye, everybody. See you at the show.
Easy to love, Kristina.